Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
About 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day, Caroline Hyde, Taylor Riggs, Katie Greifeld, counting you down to the closing bell. And here to help take us beyond that bell is our global simulcast. Tim Stenovec, Kriti Gupta is in for Carol Massler, and we bring together TV, radio, YouTube audiences to look at a market that is sort of selling off into this close. Tim, we're off by 0.6% on the S&P and actually down across the board, really.
Yeah, kind of a choppy day of trading. We just had a really interesting conversation with Abe Deshpande over at Centerstone Investors. He's the founder and CIO there. We took a big picture approach with him, and he actually said that he doesn't really know if there's going to be a recession at this point. He kept pointing to the strength of the consumer because you haven't yet seen the impact on the ground apart from housing, he said. You're hearing from these companies week after week that the consumer is still in a good place despite all the stressors that we're seeing on the economy.
And of course, that's going to be an ongoing question. And I think we've asked every guest here, is the bottom in? And no one has a really clear answer.
They can't see the future in the crystal ball?
They can't, but I guess that's what makes markets fun. But take a look at today's trading day. As you look at the S&P 500 inching closer to those session lows, well, the Bloomberg Dollar Index, it's at session highs.
The yields as well, hovering near session highs. I think a big reversal that we saw mid-morning or so, Katie. And I think for me, the story has been, despite the volatility, you've nailed it on the MOVE index versus the VIX index. But this actually isn't one of the most volatile yield days that we've seen this year. Really has been the front end of the curve, of which we know the Federal Reserve controls, that is really seeing a majority of the movement this year.
Oh, big time. And it feels like, I mean, to your point, the size and scopes, they're not even that big. Really speaks to just what a year it's been chasing these Fed expectations.
Yeah, it ended up being initial worry about Taiwan, moving into focus about the worry of, well, the Federal Reserve, what the Fed presidents were saying, Mary Daly saying we are not done yet in our fight against inflation, and perhaps we price in a more hawkish Fed. The stocks go lower by the tune of 0.6%, almost 0.7% for the S&P 500, 27 points lower as we see settlement just coming into play. The Nasdaq off by almost 0.2%, 20 points lower for big tech, which had managed to be in the green for most of the trading day. Volumes elevated, the Dow off by more than 1.2%, 401 points lower. And let's bring it out to see what the Russell 2000 did, because it had managed to be outperforming throughout the trading day, and it too managed to just sink into the red by less than 0.1% overall. Taylor and Tim.
Yeah, I mean, I know we get a hard time for focusing on the Dow, but with a decline like this, the real underperformer really points to the weight that Caterpillar, Boeing, and Intel have. Between those three companies, we got over 100 points of the decline today.
And Tim, you really see on the sector level as well, the tilt to the downside. Take a look at where we are. There's actually, for the radio audience, only 4 sectors, a few levels down within the S&P 500 that managed to close in the green. It's autos, hardware equipment, and some media and entertainment. The semiconductors, that feels pretty risk on, except that everything else is in the red. And again, for the radio audience, we go down and it feels a little bit defensive here. You have some of the dividend financials, some of the real estate, the banks, of course, as we were looking at yields rising, but again, still a further inversion of that yield curve, Kriti, which has maybe some concerns for the future of the economy.
Absolutely. And I think this is where you start to see the disconnects, the cross-asset disconnects, where you do have this bond story that is really this inversion. It's pricing in a recession. It's trading off of the names. But when you look at the equity market, and there is clearly a defensive bid to be had. I mean, just take a look at some of the gainers here today. NVIDIA, for example, NVDA is your ticker, and it ended up higher on the day. Once again, if you are concerned about the geopolitics, if you're concerned about the chips, it actually closed about, we're looking at up 0.5%. You buy the trade, you buy everyone's going to want. Lockheed Martin is going to be another major story. You also have defense stocks as well, Katie.
Got to jump in and talk about some breaking news that we get. Of course, Microstrategy reporting earnings, but the big news is that Michael Saylor will assume executive chair role, not CEO anymore, stepping down. Feng Li will serve as new CEO. That, of course, is big news when we think about what a big corporate backer of Bitcoin Michael Saylor has been, really sticking to his guns. Looks like he is still, of course, involved with the company. He's the executive chair, but a big leadership change over at Microstrategy. Microstrategy shares sinking now, down almost 5%.
We go from Microstrategy to Airbnb. A few of the headlines trickle out, and you get second quarter in the middle of that income statement, adjusted EBITDA. An outperformer, $711 million. The expectations from the street had been about $591.7 million. We also take a look at the second quarter nights and experiences booked, maybe about here right in line, 103.7 million versus estimates of 106 million. The big headline, though, that they are going to be buying back $2 billion in Class A common stock. And again, the forward guidance that looks pretty good. Third quarter revenue, $2.78 to $2.88 billion, ahead of estimates, which again, Caroline had been for $2.78 billion. So better than expected guidance and big sort of share buybacks. The stock market in the after hours tries to digest what that means.
Kind of extraordinary that it's lower, considering you're getting such a significant amount of buyback on the stock. So more than almost 2% point lower on the Airbnb. We'll dig into the income statement as to why. Interesting, we go back to what's happening with Microstrategy. Of course, kind of a pin-up Bitcoin stock and crypto stock, down by almost 5%, as the biggest proponent of crypto out there, being one Michael Saylor, is going to take a more of an elevated role as the chairman, no longer as CEO, and his focus, shock horror, is going to be on the purchase of crypto. He's saying that Saylor will focus more on Bitcoin acquisition. Remember, this is sort of a software company that basically pivoted to become an ETF tracking Bitcoin.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, at this point, Caroline, MicroStrategy is a bet on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's really hard to slice it any other way. And I'm wondering, Katie, because you've interviewed Michael Saylor in the past, what explains perhaps this, this leadership move? Because this is one that certainly wasn't announced before.
I mean, obviously, we'll have to hear it from the horse's mouth why exactly MicroStrategy is doing it. Interesting that he will be focusing on Bitcoin acquisition. That sort of speaks to their ambition to potentially buy more Bitcoin. We know that under Saylor, MicroStrategy has bought about $4 billion worth. Of course, that stake has lost more than $3 billion. Maybe the company is refocusing a little bit more on its actual business, which is a software company.
We continue to look at software companies, and the delicate dance that we do here between MicroStrategy and Airbnb is we await some other big earnings that come. And I think, Caroline, for me, sort of these further share buybacks that go ahead with breaking.
Starbucks just coming out as well. And I think you talk about share buybacks, you also talk about companies that, Airbnb had exposure to China. We're seeing Starbucks coming in with its like-for-like sales, missing expectations, a gain of 3% in the third quarter. The market wanted to see 4.26%. North America in line, up 9%. International like-for-like sales, though worse, down 18%. The estimate had been for a 16% drop. And overall, Chinese sales falling 44%. We shouldn't be surprised given the lockdowns over COVID, but still the estimate had been for a 39% drop. And we're seeing net revenue come in at $8.15 billion, which is basically in line. It's an adjusted earnings per share.
We're digesting all of these, Caroline. I want to get a little bit more insight into Airbnb and want to bring in Mandeep Singh. Of course, you know him as our senior technology analyst here for Bloomberg Intelligence. And Mandeep, for us, in terms of the fundamentals, it's a big share buyback. But what do you also make of the numbers? And now looking at some of the strongest numbers yet here, but the market not maybe reacting to that.
Well, you have to keep in mind the estimates for Airbnb actually went up, coming into the quarter. They were up by almost 10%. So travel was supposed to, be a nice tailwind. It reflects in the results, but it doesn't show up as much in the upside. And I think what they're trying to do here is probably boost more supply in the anticipation that travel demand remains robust. But, at the end of the day, a marketplace is all about, how much can you boost supply and whether customers can take that price increases. So they were a little short on the room nights. That's where I think they probably missed expectations. But overall, I think this is a terrific quarter, and profitability looks great, actually.
Now, Mandeep, tell us.
Tim, can I just break in for a second? Because we do have some breaking news coming out of Robinhood. And it's a significant news in terms of reducing headcount by some 23%.
Wow.
This is coming as a statement coming from the CEO and co-founder Vlad Tenev. And remember, this is a company we're expecting to have earnings of later in the week, but they are saying that they're cutting headcount to the tune of 23%. This is once again a company that has been under pressure, trying to scale back, maybe having beefed up too much during the COVID period where everyone was sat at home and trading stocks like MicroStrategy, which we just had news on, and Airbnb. And so it is notable, Katie, I think that we do have this reduction in headcount.
Absolutely, and you're seeing that reflected in the shares after hours, down by about 2%, but really jumping around. Of course, this is a stock that's already down 48% so far this year, Tim.
Okay, I want to go back to Mandeep Singh covering Airbnb because he's had a little bit more time to jump into that earnings report from the company. You called it a pretty much terrific quarter, Mandeep. When you were on radio with us just a little while ago, you mentioned looking at parts of the report to give you an idea of the strength of the consumer and to what extent the consumer is actually willing to pay up for experiences such as the ones that Airbnb offers. What can you tell us about the strength of the consumer in this report?
Yeah, so I think Airbnb's clear trend was long duration nights. They were doing very well, and that doesn't seem to be the case this quarter. So clearly, ADRs continue to go higher, which is a function of supply and demand, but room nights fell a little short. And I think even though they beat on the quarter, room nights is the ultimate kind of metric when it comes to gauging, the consumer demand elasticity. And I think overall you do see pricing having an impact in terms of the overall hotel room night growth.
Mandeep Singh, really appreciate it despite the whiplash. Our senior technology analyst here for Bloomberg Intelligence. Tim, I think we say goodbye.
All right, AMD shares down 5% after third quarter sales forecast lagging at midpoint. We got much more to do when it comes to earnings. We'll continue the coverage in just a few minutes. In the meantime, we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place for our Beyond the Bell coverage.